Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Safright, and I am a faculty consultant with the National Association of Secondary School Principals. I will be your moderator for today's webinar as we learn about the professional standards for educational leaders. I want to thank everybody for giving up some time in your knowingly busy schedule to improve your leadership ability and learn more about these professional standards. Before we get too far into the presentation, I want to make sure everybody's aware of some help they can receive if you have any technical problems during the webinar. If you have a pencil and paper to jot this down real quick, the toll-free number for webinar support is 855-352-9002, and the webinar ID that you will need when calling that support is 114-352-931. I'll repeat that information so that if you are hearing me but cannot see the screen at this point, please call toll-free 855-352-9002, and the webinar ID number that you will need when calling that support number is 114-352-931. We would encourage you, as you're participating in this webinar today, to expand the conversation on Twitter. You can see the Twitter handle there, and use hashtag NASSP webinar. NASSP is also on Facebook, and you can see the NASSP website specific to this webinar. I want to make sure you have Twitter handles for two of our presenters today, both of whom I will introduce in just a minute. But the Twitter handle for Ronald, one of our presenters today, is at RAM Education, and for Sharon is at Sharon H. Porter. And again, I'll have those handles up on the screen here in just a minute. But Ronald is at RAM Education, and Sharon is at Sharon H. Porter. Also on this screen, you should see a picture of what you should see on your screen, a place where you can ask questions during the presentation. Due to the pace that the presenters are going to have to keep to get through the content that we need to cover with you today, we're not going to stop and ask questions during the presentation, but we have built in plenty of time at the end of the presentation to make sure that we address hopefully everybody's questions. So as a question comes to your mind during the presentation, please don't hesitate. Go ahead and put it in this question box so we can build up a queue of questions. We can have a nice collection of questions there. And again, we will try to address as many of those as we can towards the end of the presentation. We've left plenty of time for that. And if we're not able to get to all your questions, we can certainly continue the conversation offline on Twitter or by email. So again, please don't wait to get us your questions. Enter those in that question box as the webinar goes forward. I do want to remind everybody that today's webinar is being recorded. NASSP will record this and will make it available on the NASSP website within the next 24 hours. That link will be at nassp.org/webinars. Today's webinar and past webinars are always available there at that link. We are pleased to have 4 different staff members from Prince George County Public Schools with us today. Sharon Porter has served as an educator for the last 24 years. She is currently a school leadership development coach for first and second year elementary and middle school principals, and is the assistant principal induction program coordinator, where she assists in the development of novice assistant principals in the Office of Talent Development with Prince George County Public Schools in Maryland. William Lee currently provides mentoring and coaching for teachers in the county. During the past 2 decades, William has worked in various teaching and leadership capacities within the education arena to equip children with literacies that empower them to change their lives for the better. Ronald Miller Jr. has worked as an office assistant, camp counselor, tutor, diversity consultant, sales associate, middle school teacher, and instructional specialist for digital learning and currently is a high school assistant principal in Prince George's County. Carrie Curry is an assistant principal at Laurel High School in Prince George's County, where she has worked for the last 15 years. In addition to serving as assistant principal at Laurel, she has served as an English teacher, English department chair, testing coordinator, IB and AP coordinator, and the instructional coordinator. Again, I want to make sure everybody has Ronald's Twitter handle. That's at RAM Education, and Sharon's is at Sharon H. Porter. And again, reminder that during the presentation today, we do invite your questions. Please submit them using that question box, and we will respond to as many questions as time permits at the end of the session. Having said that, I'd like to bring in our panelists. Panelists, thank you again for your time and your preparation and leading us and teaching us all more about these new standards.
Thank you. We are so excited that everyone has decided to join us on today's webinar. On behalf of Prince George's County Public Schools, I would like to welcome you again. My colleagues and I are delighted to unpack the Professional Standards for Educational Leaders 2015, which is now most commonly known as PSEL 2015. PSEL 2015, of course, is a revision of the former Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium standards. Our hope is that you will develop a better understanding of how and in what ways effective leadership contributes to student achievement. It is widely acknowledged through research that effective leadership is key to improving student achievement. In the recently published literature review titled How Leadership Influenced Student Learning, the links between student achievement and educational leadership practices were examined. One of the important claims was that leadership is second only to classroom instruction, and that is among all school-related factors. Improving student learning takes a holistic view of leadership. We will also identify the daily tasks, responsibilities, and activities that align with PSEL 2015. There are 4 additional standards. My colleague William Lee will discuss those a little later. The revision of these standards focus strongly and clearly on students and student learning. Even the phrasing of the standards place an emphasis on each student and not just students in general. There is now a strong emphasis on educational equity and cultural responsiveness. Cultural responsive school leadership, we know, affects school equity, inclusion, curriculum standards, and school climate. There has to be a social justice lens through which all decisions are made. There is a strong connection between student achievement and shared leadership. The collective influence of school leaders and all stakeholders yields a greater impact on student learning. Next slide, please, Matt. This graphic is from the full report of PSEL 2015. The standards can be divided into 3 broad areas as presented by Beverly Hutton and Mark Smiley. The standards that are considered the drivers are Standard 1, Mission, Vision, and Core Values, Standard 2, Ethics and Professional Norms, Standard 3, Equity and Cultural Responsiveness, and Standard 10, School Improvement, and that's represented in the red and the purple circles. These standards drive our practice. Then you have the core of who we are as educator practitioners. Standard 4, Curriculum and Instruction, and Standard 5, Community of Care and Support Students, and this is represented in the orange circle. Then our standards that support our work. We have Standard 6, Professional Capacity of School Personnel, Standard 7, Professional Community for Teachers and Staff, and Standard 8, Meaningful Engagement of Families and Community, and that's with an emphasis on meaningful, and then Standard 9, Operations and Management. PSEL 2015 provides guideposts for educational leaders, what effective leaders do and how they do it. One important fact is the domains do not function independently, but as interdependent systems in improving student learning. The next slide, please. And my colleague William will discuss the development of those standards.
Thank you, Sharon. Before we begin unpacking the 2015 professional standards for education leaders, let's briefly examine the creation and the evolution of the standards. Specifically, we're going to look briefly at what changes occurred to the standards, why those changes occurred, and what benefits accrue as a result of those changes. If you'll look at, next slide, please. As you are aware, in 1996, ISLLC was established with 6 standards. Those 6 standards reflected the scope of the work of education leaders. Additionally, those ISLLC standards articulated the knowledge, skills, and abilities expected of education leaders. With the exception of a slight revision in 2008 to the ISLLC standards, for nearly 2 decades since their inception in 1996, no changes had occurred to the ISLLC standards. In 2008, a slight change occurred. However, in 2015, the ISLLC standards evolved into our current professional standards for education leaders. Likely you are wondering, what changes occurred? Next slide, please. The next slide offers a visual comparison of the specific changes that occurred from ISLLC to PSEL 2015. As you see, there were 6 ISLLC standards. They evolved in 2015 to 10 standards. If you'll give attention to the bold red standards to the right, numbers 3, 4, 7, and 10, those were the standards that were added in 2015, and my colleagues later in this presentation will explore those standards in greater depth. The next slide clarifies why the need for the new standards for education leaders. The first reason why those standards needed to change was because of a robust body of knowledge, specifically research that affirmed that there is a direct connection between effective leadership and the resultant increased student achievement, teacher effectiveness, and improved student or school communities. The second reason why the ISLLC standards changed, you would agree, the scope of the work of education leaders has continued to evolve and expand since 1996. Thus, the need for those standards to evolve to reflect the realities of 21st century educators like yourselves. Finally, the next slide highlights some of the benefits that accrue from the new standards. 2 specifically, the breadth and the depth of the work of education leaders is more comprehensively reflected in the PSEL 2015 standards. Also, stakeholders, all stakeholders in education, have greater transparency, and they are able to hold education leaders accountable for the expectations expressed in those standards. At this time, my colleague Ronald Miller will continue to guide us to unpack the new standards.
Thank you, William. Next slide, please. As we look at the standards, all 10 standards, as Sharon and William were referring to, on the left-hand side, you look at standards 1, mission, vision, and core values. As an assistant principal, and my colleague Carrie is an assistant principal as well, we really want to give you guys the opportunity to hear how do these standards really apply to our daily work, the activities and programs that we put in place on a daily, yearly, quarterly basis, so you can see some takeaways at the end of this presentation to say, hey, that was a really good idea, or to give you some thoughts or some synergy around, I think we should try this in my local school. So one activity you could look at for doing supporting standard 1 around mission, vision, and core values would be participate and have a chair committee in developing the mission, vision, and core values of your school or district. You also want to have data-driven instruction, so utilizing data to inform any decisions that's made around what should the vision or the mission of your school be will really gain buy-in and support from stakeholders. We'll also talk about standards 2, the ethics and professional norms, and standards 3 and 4, and then I'll throw it over to my colleague Carrie. But we'll talk about some things you can do in each of those as far as around activities and programs to really support and detail out the work that you can do around each of these standards. Next slide, please. Sharon made a comment about the new standards and the drivers that they are. So once again, the standard around equity and cultural responsiveness, that's standard 3, and it's really the professional practices that we have. Curriculum instruction and assessment being around students, professional communities for teachers and staff, professional development, school improvement. Those are things we would also revolve around professional practices and making us better as educators. But as we start to go through these standards, we can really look at how those things needed to be added to the previous ISLLC standards to really encompass the ever-changing world of education and landscape that we see now in 2016. Next slide, please, Matt. So standard 1, let's break it down a little further. So you could have a committee that comes up with some really great things for the mission and vision for your school, and if they're using data to drive that decision-making and their process and their thought process, that's definitely on track with what you want to be doing to really live out standard number 1. Also, developing those models and missions and taglines that you have in the district really gain buy-in. We have a great saying here when people ask you, well, how are you doing today? We say great by choice. It's just a response that everyone's really bought in here in Prince George's County, that you can really see that people are really about the mission and the work of helping students. But those things are also data-driven. We've had some book studies and things to support why we say that, but also we focus on the kids because of that. The protocols and structures and how we interact with people and the attitudes that we use to approach our work all come from data that we've looked at within ourselves to say we could do this better. Next slide, please. Also, that data brings out conversations around behaviors that you can say, you know what, we could do this better by making things more fun for our kids. You know, kids tend to learn a little bit more when you provide some incentives. So PBIS, we have that to help incentivize some of the activities for students, whether it's academic achievement or their behavior, because we know culture and climate is really paramount in the school. That supports your mission and vision and your values, your core values. Also, having that space to talk about those things and revisit, to say, you know what, maybe we've gotten a little off track or off mission or off message. What do we need to do to self-correct using data or even change the direction that we're going in? And sometimes you also want to make sure to revisit the behavior plans that are in place, whether it's students' IEPs or the PBIS for the whole school or a district or a grade level even, to really talk about what are we doing to really make sure we're living up to the mission and vision and standards we set for ourselves. Next slide, please, Matt. So we're going to spend a little bit of time, like I said, going further into what do each of these things look like, the activities and programs you can do, and throwing out some ideas that we can talk about here in the webinar for you guys to really take away. It'd be great if you guys could, you know, jot down some notes, maybe some questions for later about, hey, well, what about this, or things you might just want to share out with some of the other participants on the call about the activities as they relate to each of the standards, the 10 standards that we're going to review today. We can continue on to the next slide. So standard 3, one of those drivers for professional practice, equity and cultural responsiveness. So we're talking about how do we recruit and retain minority teachers and leaders. We know the demographic shift in the nation is happening. You can see it in your classrooms, and that's just going to continue on as we get to I think it is 46, where the nation should definitely be probably a minority-majority nation. That's a landscape that we're all going to have to navigate. So being ready to be responsive to the needs of those new stakeholders and students and parents who will be coming into our communities and our schools. So having excellence through equity. You can have summer initiatives. You can have, you know, a couple of, you know, different types of programs to really talk about cultural diversity, where people can appreciate all the different things that come in. And when we talk about cultural diversity, you also need to talk about cultural competency, making sure that people don't have to walk in eggshells because they know exactly what to do when interacting with different cultures or how to be open to learning about new cultures. That may be something that needs to be ongoing. It's not going to be a one-shot and done, I never need to have that kind of training again, but an ongoing process. What types of new teacher induction programs? You heard Sharon is responsible for the administrative induction program, which I'm a part of, and it's a great benefit to first-year administrators. But what are you doing for your teachers? How do you do the work here? What's the expectation about how we interact with culture, with students, with gender, the inclusion that we're talking about, all of those things need to be in the topic of conversation and brought up as a standard that you want to live out in your district. Also, what ongoing policy updates need to happen? You always need to revisit what's actually written down in your administrative policy, because those are the things that people refer to when you have different situations and issues. So how can we, what are we saying as a district? This is our official statement here in our policy. And also train-the-trainer models. Our district is pretty large. We have, over 120,000 students and probably 20,000 staff members, teachers, employees, cafeteria workers, and everything else. So when we have to train everyone, what are the models that we're using? So trainer-trainers, we're training this person, we're training that person. And we'll talk a little bit more about PLCs, professional learning communities, later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So another thing we can add there about having that equity and cultural responsiveness is the wraparound services. I think that's one of the keys there. Sometimes we know that, some kids don't have everything they need at home. So we have a lot of things that have to happen in school, whether it's immunizations, eye screenings, dental screenings, different types of food pantries and options that might come into the school and provide students all kinds of things to get through certain periods of the year. But those things also have to be centered around data. What's our free and reduced meals numbers look like? How many single-parent households do we have? We're going to have some socioeconomic issues that we need to take into account, and data we can say we need to target these students in this way to support them the best way possible. International high schools, maybe you have a large, ESOL population or English as a second language population. What are we doing to support those families of students who are often considered less than, but it's just a language barrier? And some of those kids are probably your brightest kids, but because they can speak several languages. So how are we really encompassing and reaching out to those different communities? And what professional development opportunities are we providing as well? Instructional practice, learning styles of students, and all the different subgroups that we're trying to reach that we can also see through our data. Next slide.
In Standard 4, we're looking...
Oh, I'm sorry. Carrie's going to go ahead and continue on with Standard 4. Go ahead, Carrie.
Good afternoon. The standard for curriculum instruction and assessment is really all about using those systems to promote the academic success of each child. As Sharon said earlier, these standards really focus on each child individually, not just your student population as a whole. So when you're having your weekly data meetings, not only is it about having the data meetings, but it's about using your data, including the assessment data, appropriately to monitor student progress and improve instruction. The benchmarks that we give should be consistent with the curriculum and learning outcomes and technical standards of measurement so that we're making the best use of our time when assessing our students. We're not just weighing the hog, as they say. We have to feed it too to make sure they get that instruction they need to do well on the assessments. We also need to make sure we have consistent practices of teacher observations, because as leaders we need to use the observation process with the purpose of ensuring that students are receiving the instruction that's differentiated and personalized to their experiences. It's great to have a ready-made lesson plan, but if that lesson plan doesn't connect with your students, it doesn't have the same impact. Next slide. Also in Standard 4, we need to really look at each decision that we make in a building. And those decisions should be completely in line with what our instructional goals are for the year. So going back to what we said about the mission, vision, and goals, it's really important to have a solid vision and mission so that we know how to make our decisions so that it's in the best interest of our students. Next slide. And I'm going to pass it back to Ronald to talk about Standard 7.
Thanks, Gary. Standard 7 is professional community for teachers and staff. So I mentioned a little bit before previously about professional learning communities. Well, we also know that a lot of teachers have a lot of great things, or they may be an expert in certain areas, and some of the other members of their team, grade level, department may not necessarily have that same skill set. So it's really important to get those types of people in small groups of 3 to 5 teachers and colleagues to really share out what they know. When you have those small groups, they often learn better and learn a lot more from each other than just sitting in a staff development training and saying, here, everyone learn this at one time. You know, people often feel less threatened when they're in small groups to ask questions and really get that understanding. So having PLCs in place are awesome. Creating structures for learning through common planning, that comes back to your master scheduling. Are you doing, you know, collaborative planning for departments? Are you doing team planning if you're at the middle school level of secondary for your, you know, grade levels where those same teachers are seeing students all the day so they can talk about how the student doing in English or math or social studies, but, you know, different levels of planning through the master schedule. Also, expectations that the professional learning that occurs is the result of ensuring the practice improves student outcomes. Why are we talking about this? Is this going to impact student performance? Is this going to impact teacher performance? Those are things that we really want to look at to say we can help kids by studying this. Also, compact of collaboration groups. So are we dealing with some of our feeder schools? Are we talking about some of our teachers who want to intern and learn and try to grow in their professional capacity and say, if I look at this from a different person's lens, maybe I'll understand the problem in a different way or in a better way or in a way that makes my work seem even more important. Also, collaboration is one of the strategic way in really solving any problem. You get some of the best answers when you have this heterogeneous group of people all coming together and really thinking about, hey, did you look at this from the testing coordinator standpoint? Did you look at this from the administration standpoint or the teacher standpoint or the paraprofessional standpoint? All those things make up for a really good conversation about how we can move people forward. Next slide, please. So when you have those professional communities for teachers and staff, you really have to set some norms. Like, what do we want to do to get the most out of these sessions? Also, when you have student-driven collaborations, that's what really comes together. We're here because we want to meet with the teachers and the students and really drive the work. Sometimes you ask kids, what do you need to learn best? You'll be surprised with some of the answers that come out from them. You can also help those students create those structures for what they need to learn. Maybe people say, I need that small group, I need that PLC. Or they say, I do better when we report out or do a jigsaw activity. I can't read this entire book by myself, but if I just have a chapter and I become the expert on that chapter, I learn a lot more. Also doing some peer observations, learning walks. A lot of times we talk about, as administrators, people often feel I'm under observation and evaluation versus just a peer coming in and just observing and taking notes and saying, hey, I really like what you did with your kids in that classroom. That's something I think I could repeat or do better or tweak it a little bit to work for me to be just as effective with that group of kids. Also encouraging all voices to be heard in a room through effective use of protocols to structure shared work. Sometimes we have this thing in big sessions called back channeling, where you get to see a lot of questions that pop up because folks don't necessarily want to raise their hand, but they'll pose the question in the group. One of my favorite things about having this format today is that all the questions I'm sure we'll get from the participants there, where maybe we had done this in person, people probably would not have asked that question, but to see it pop up in a question group is really beneficial to everyone. And also having some common assessments with the process to foster academic improvement. We always want to be able to gauge what we're doing, if it's working, if it's beneficial. So what type of assessment are we going to use to show that this is worth our while and our time? Next slide, please.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about school improvement. School improvement has changed drastically in Prince George's County over the last 2 to 3 years. It used to be one person sitting in a room writing a long document saying who was going to be responsible for what thing, and you wrote it at the beginning of the year, and maybe you went back and looked at it, and maybe you didn't, and at the end of the year you started all over with a new process. Really, we're moving away from that and toward a more comprehensive living system of school improvement, which is what these standards are really promoting, that's constantly being revisited and monitored. School improvement is an opportunity for us to identify teacher leaders who we would like to bring into the process, who can participate and give us really what's happening in the classroom, that that thing as leaders, we see it, but we don't experience it as directly as they do. So getting them more involved in the school improvement process really gives us a better lens. Over the past 2 years, Prince George's County has adopted the data-wise school improvement process, and that takes all of that data that we get, the file cabinets full of data that what did we do with it? And really gives us a way to look at that data in a methodical and purposeful manner to make real and lasting improvements in teaching and learning. It's important that we just don't look at the assessment data when it comes in and the scores go up and say, wow, that was great, or that wasn't so good, we can do better next year, so we'll just work harder. This improvement process gives us a look at a model to use that has 8 specific steps, and you take a step-by-step approach that really helps you dig into that data to identify a problem that we can solve, and then work on an action plan that will help us get to the solution. And then once we do, to monitor its effectiveness. And then you start over so that you can continue to improve the process for your students. We talked about a couple of other counties had representatives at the symposium who talked about the things that they were doing with promising principal statewide academies and working with their SLOs and LEA teams in order to really just improve the process of school improvement. Ronald, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to agree with you, Carrie, and say that it's definitely a different type of reflective practice that we're entering in as well with the data-wise process. If we'll go to the next slide. So Standard 2 describes ethics and professional norms. Nationwide, we hear a lot of conversation about, the safety of our kids here in schools. And one of the big things is to really push for teachers and administrators and educators to really be the guardians of the sanctity and safety of our students is you have to act in an ethical manner. You really have to be professional in how you treat everyone. And that's, you really have to promote professional norms. So we're talking about, what are you doing as a leader, leading by example. Often in our district, we talk about lead from where you are. The principal is the leader in your building, but you can be the leader in your grade level. You can be the leader in your classroom to your students by setting the example of this is how we're going to interact with one another. This is how we're going to speak to one another. These are the things that, when you see me speaking to a colleague, I'm going to do. Because when you set that good example, all of a sudden a lot of other things start falling in place when you lead from where you are. And as a leader in the building, lead as a leader and set that example all the time. We have a pretty large district, but at the same time it feels pretty small, so we see a lot of each other outside of work, and often how you act outside of work and showing that ethical manner all the time is really indicative of having and being a great leader. Also being collaborative, once again, in how you do your professional development. Bringing people in saying, let's do this, let's try this, maybe we need to work on that. How can we get better in our ethics and our professional practices, and identifying those strengths and weaknesses and really having that conversation through data, once again, so that people understand we're doing this for a reason. This is an area where we struggle and we want to grow, or this is a strength and this is something we want to focus on when we're talking about the benefits and the great work that we're doing in our school or in our district. Next slide. So another thing you also want to think about when you're talking about Standard 2 and ethics and professional norms is how do you promote diverse backgrounds through multicultural awareness activities, whether that's, Hispanic Heritage Month, African American or Black History Month, what types of heritage activities, or is it a multicultural day that you're doing, or a different type of food festival, or just having kids do show and tell with, authentic things that they got from different places in the world and talk about the stories attached to that souvenir. You'd be really surprised with some of the experiences that most kids have and how accepting they are of different cultures at an early age, and really promoting that diversity in backgrounds and hearing everyone's story and valuing everyone's story. When you engage in inclusive and positive dialogue that's respectful of all, whether it's staff meetings, collaborative planning meetings, PTA meetings, or just in parent-teacher conferences, you start setting the tone for your school and your district and how you value inclusiveness and diversity. We can go to the next slide, Matthew.
Okay, picking up with Standard 5, building a community of care and support is a way for the school to provide programs that meet the academic, social, emotional, and physical needs of each student. It's important for each student to feel valued, trusted, and respected. Some of the ways that this can be done were brought up in our brainstorming session and include coaching and supporting. Some of the ways that they talked about were pre-K for everyone, universal pre-K and expansion grant, center principals and teachers and parents, getting them all involved in the process, asking them what they need, trying to provide them with things that they don't have. 21st century after-school programs. This doesn't just include before and after care. It's not just about babysitting the kids after school. It's getting homework help. It's sometimes it's teaching parents how to do the new Common Core math. It's having extracurricular activities that involve the needs and the wants of each student, not just sports clubs or straight academic clubs, but maybe you have a gaming club because that meets the need of one of your student niches. Mentoring programs, not only just mentors within the school, but bringing in community members who have a lot of experience and resources to mentor your students. A lot of schools use the Maryland Food Bank and backpack programs for students who don't have food over those days that we don't have school. Thinking back on the snow days that we had in the middle of the winter, if some of those kids don't come to school, they don't eat lunch that day. So a couple of the schools in our county, when we were closed, actually opened to provide lunch and breakfast for some of those students. Connecting and supporting students and families that are new to the U.S. through some of those wraparound services that Ronald was talking about earlier. And just best practices of academic and social supports like PBIS and a responsive classroom. Next slide, please. Sharon, did you want to share on Standard 6 regarding the work that you and your office are doing around the professional capacity of school personnel?
Absolutely. Our school district as a whole is really placing a greater emphasis in improving the quality of school leadership, and that's through recruiting and hiring practices, of course, through our Human Resources Office. But more specifically in my department, the Office of Talent Development, our focus is on induction and development. We have a coherent induction professional development system for newly appointed assistant principals as well as principals. Our assistant principal induction program is a required 2-year program for all assistant principals appointed after the 2013-14 school year. Our comprehensive principal induction program is for all newly appointed principals. We also have created work strands in our office, and basically it was recognized that our work overlapped, and it really focuses the work for individuals within our teams. In the work strands, you may have various work streams, and for example, we have school leadership and development work stream. We have a teacher leadership development work stream, a university partnerships, mentoring, coaching, and induction, leadership center. So through the various strands, we come together and provide a focused work on the work that we do in the Office of Talent Development. Next slide, please. Along with that is the observations and feedback that we assist our newly appointed administrators in providing to their staff, because we know that effective feedback also builds the capacity of your school personnel, often and effective. The new support is always related to the professional development that's provided through all of our programs. Ronald mentioned the induction program. We have a whole system that we do for new teachers, which we call the PEEP. It's a professional induction program for new teachers. Again, the APIP, the Assistant Principal Induction Program, where all of our newly appointed assistant principals are developed, and we try to build that leadership capacity. We then move on to various programs. When they're chosen to be principals, they're again inducted into the new principal academy. So we really have a focused effort on the induction and the development of our personnel. Next slide, please. Ronald.
Thank you, Sharon. So Standard 8, the meaningful engagement of families and community. This is a point where I really enjoy looking at Standard 8. This in my daily practice. You really have to try to get parents to understand and the community understand that when it comes to the schools, it's not a us versus the school. You really want to engage and include and collaborate with all of your groups, because we talk about resources and asset mapping from your community, because you don't know the tools and the resources that can come in. You might have a church group to say we could do some after-school tutoring and provide tutors. You might have a Boys and Girls Club that says, hey, we want to siphon off some of your kids to come here and we can do a tutoring there where they can volunteer and get some service hours. There are a lot of different things that happen when you start opening your mind up to collaborating with, you know, the assets and resources that are at hand in your school community. Also, at the same time, you can bring parents in and do a parent university for enhanced communication. Sometimes navigating local systems such as where to register to vote since we're in an election year, or how to get a driver's license to open a bank account might be tough and difficult for some international parents. So how do we do those things, and really giving those parents the skills to navigate, you know, our society that we may even take for granted. Advocating and helping inform legislation. A lot of times we talk about, you know, parents are the biggest advocate for their child. So when you take it to a more organized and bigger, you know, sphere of influence, parents could go to this local level, the state level, even the national level, and say, hey, we need this for our kids. Our children's future is this nation's future. So what can we do to really give them everything they need and all the tools they need to be successful? And it starts with advocacy at the local level and moving on up. We can also talk about how we form those partnerships, from preschool programs to the different types of charter schools you may have in your district, to some in-house services. We have a lot of schools here that have Head Start and pre-K and early learning programs, you know, for employees to bring their kids to really not only help employees out with child care, but also teach kids and start pipelining some of our students into early education. So we start grooming the next generation of teachers for our students, you know, right here in our own schools, within our own walls. Also, being visible at events. You'd be surprised the traction you'll get with kids or parents if you just show up to a local football game, the Boys and Girls Club game, or the cheer competition, or the dance competition, or the Easter play, or the Sunday mass at a church or a mosque or a temple. Those things really matter to parents, and having that type of visibility gains you some equity and some, you know, a little bit of currency when it comes to, hey, we really need to talk about some things we can do moving forward to support your child. Also, being members of HOAs in your community. We have a lot of people who reside in Prince George's County and work in Prince George's County and have children in the school system in Prince George's County. So it's a lot of interconnectivity going on. So being parts and members and, you know, presidents of different functions and community organizations that can really help support schools. Maybe you want to host your HOA meeting at a school because you're not only a teacher at the school, but also the vice president of the HOA. Those are things that we really talk about, really having meaningful engagement. Also, we live in a digital generation, and we have a lot of digital natives. So electronic communication, we have a lot of parents who don't have a house phone. They live on their cell phone. So reaching out to them via Twitter, you know, Instagram, Snapchat, all kinds of things, regular email, Facebook. Those are ways that really get messages out, and having that presence online. And not only doing that, but at the same time, when you electronically communicate to your parents, you also model what good digital citizenship looks like for your students. So it's a two-way street there. Having and developing business partnerships are always key. Targeted parent-teacher conferences. So, hey, we're going to talk about maybe PARK this week or this month is our focus as we enter the testing season here. And also, different types of community plaza events where you can get those family life skills. Carrie, was there anything you wanted to add to this one?
Well, not only the community plaza for the ELL families, but we also have a lot of pretty significant issues that are facing our students that our parents may not have faced when they were in school, so they're not quite sure how to address it with their students, things like suicide and bullying. These things are things our parents didn't deal with, or they dealt with them in a very different way. So having parent nights where we bring in resources from the community in order to help our parents learn how to talk to their kids about these issues, those are some of the things that we've done in our system that have really helped to build that bridge between the school and the community and their families. Next slide. Standard 9 really deals with the operation and management of the schools. These are the systems and structures that make the school work. All resources, such as human resources, planning time, capital, and inventory resources, should really be aligned to meet student needs. Those, sometimes we get lost in meeting human needs in our buildings, and we don't meet student needs. So when you're making your master schedule, the teachers who are teaching the classes should be the best for the students who are taking the class. Maybe that it's not the class that the teacher necessarily really wants to teach, but they're able to teach it and the students need them to teach it because their passion for the subject matter will help them to be successful in the class. Everything from the master schedule to the budget should be aligned to meet the vision and mission of your school. When you look down at the vertical alignment with feeder schools, a really unique way of doing that is to be able to look at the alignment all the way through from elementary, middle to high school. In a perfect world, it would be great to be able to have your high school language arts teachers go to the middle school and meet with the middle school language arts teachers so they know what it is that the students are learning before they get to high school, and for the high school teachers to be able to communicate with the middle school teachers about what it is that the students are coming to high school deficient in so that they can help build those students' skills up in order to make them more successful when they get to high school. Another thing that we really need to spend some time inventorying the resources that we have and allocating the resources that we need in order to help our students be successful and meet the goals that they've set. One of those things is technology. Even in our county, each school has a different level of technology available to their students, whether they've been given grants or refreshes. Each school has to use their digital technology in the way that's best for their students to get them, to help them meet the goals. We also have restorative practices where we're ensuring the fairness and equity to each student, and that's one of the things that really as a system we've worked on to make sure that each student has the same level of rigor available to them, whether they're in the southern part of the county or the northern part of the county, whether their individual area school has a lot of money and resources within the community, or whether they don't, they still have the same availability and the same opportunity to have that rigor and the resources and the technology available to them as any other student in the county. It's really been one of the priorities. Did anybody have anything they wanted to add to the standards before we move on to the question and answer?
No. Yes, we can move on.
Thank you all for this great information so far. We do have several questions that have come in through the question box there. Again, participants, really appreciate the questions that have come in so far. And panelists, you guys can decide who wants to take these questions, and one or more of you respond to these. So let's dive into those. And participants, again, if you have more questions, go ahead and send those in to us at this time. Karen asked a little while ago, and I'll quote here, "I worry that Standard 3 seems to only support cultural responsiveness, but increasing diversity means we need principals and educators to know how to educate students who speak different languages. It is so much more than just being comfortable." So panelists, if you would speak just for a minute about that how question. Is the big question there about how we educate students who speak those different languages.
Yes, I'll take that, Matt. And I definitely agree with the participant. It definitely is more than being comfortable. Standard 3, equity and cultural responsiveness, is all about fairness, respect, equitable access, which we just talked about in the previous slide. So it's more of not only cultural responsiveness, but we want to be fair to our students and making sure, as Carrie said, that they have equitable access to rigorous curriculum, no matter where they are in our school. And so that's one of the things that we as educational leaders have to make sure that our staff is actually abiding by. And that comes from developing those students' policies and addressing student misconduct in a positive manner, in an appropriate and fair and unbiased manner. So it definitely is more than cultural responsiveness, although that does play a huge part of it. We have to be mindful of the respect that students are receiving, and are we just simply treating our students fairly? I think is how I would respond to that.
That's great. That's great. Thanks very much. Next question we've got here came in from Alice, and the question is, do you have or do you advocate a specific model for teacher collaboration? Alice thought about that while you were discussing the collaborative work in Standard 2. So again, the question is, do you have a specific model for teacher collaboration, or can you talk about that for a minute?
I think William may be best to answer that.
Sure. We don't have a specific excuse me, we don't have a specific model, but we do have some ubiquitous practices that we use in the district as it relates to collaboration. Carrie spoke to, one is the use of DataWise as a process by which we filter through information. The other is that we encourage all schools to, and Ronald spoke to that, the PLCs, professional learning communities. And so that should be happening at the school level. As one of the mentors for the district, I have the unique pleasure, really, of traveling the district so that I get to see what is happening in schools as it relates to not just collaboration, but teaching and learning in general. I can say that one thing that is consistent throughout the district is that all principals, at least the principals of the schools that I have the responsibility for monitoring, they do in fact require and monitor the use or how collaboration is done at the school level. We also use in the district a process that was newly introduced to our office, the Office of Talent Development this year, rolling agendas. We recognize that that is something that is actually catching fire throughout the district. The executives in the district use it, and so it's filtered throughout the district as well. And that's a process by which it allows individuals, whether they are present physically at those meetings or not, to really know what is going on and to have a voice. So rolling agendas is something that we use throughout the district, and we certainly are encouraging others to do as well. So those are just two of the practices that we use in the district as it comes to collaboration.
Okay, excellent. Next question from Tamika. Two standards that can have a significant impact on the inclusion of students with disabilities are standard number 3, equity and cultural responsiveness, and standard number 5, community of care and support for students. Tamika's question, what have you seen as the biggest challenges for administrators when it comes to students with disabilities, and how has it been or will be addressed? And she's got a follow-up question there, but we'll take it in pieces here. So again, the question is, what have you seen, panelists, as the biggest challenges for administrators when it comes to students with disabilities, and how has that been addressed?
Matt, I'd love to answer Tamika's question. This is Ronald. So one thing I think is really getting parents to get over the stigma of identifying their child or having a child tested and assessed to see what disabilities are there, whether it's physical disabilities or some types of special educational needs. I think once parents get past the stigma that they often associate with it, they understand I need to get all the resources available to help my child, then schools can really move forward with the work of supporting their child and giving that community of care. I think she was getting into the next question about how we can best help your child. In Prince George's County, we have an initiative where we're trying to mainstream as many of our special education students as possible to really decrease the number of intensive special education classrooms and go with more of a co-teach model where we have a teacher and a co-teacher in there, and the co-teacher is not only teaching all the students, but really with a focus on those kids in there who have some special education needs as well, whether that be a physical disability or, you know, some other type of academic special education need. We also have a lot of different programs in the district, like our community reference instruction, our CRI program, which also focuses on mainstreaming students to make sure that they can integrate into society in a mainstream and be a productive member of society as well. So it's a lot of things you can do, but I think the first hurdle is making sure parents are going to work with the school to support. Administrators definitely always going to do what they can to make sure that, you know, paperwork and documentation and everything is filled out in order to provide the services for students. But a lot of time we get hung up on, you know, parents signing off or showing up to meetings. So really pushing that and having parents understand that we're all on the same team, and that's team support your child, and really going from that direction forward.
Yeah, love it. Love it. That's great. I'm actually going to go back to you guys' last answer. Several people have written in, and when you were talking about rolling agendas, several people have asked for some elaboration or explanation on what exactly a rolling agenda is. Several people, including myself, have not heard of that. So if you can give us just a minute about what that means, what that looks like, how that functions.
Sharon, would you pick this up?
I sure will. Yes, it actually is just really a Google Doc that you can use, and you give access to anyone inside or outside of the school district. If you go into your Google Drive, you can create a new Google Doc, and all of our meetings actually just go, the meeting notes rolls on, which is why it's called a rolling agenda. You can see the meeting, all the previous meetings are there. The attendance, you are able to insert links, you're able to insert graphics, images, and so as William said prior, it just makes everyone available to have their voice heard, even if they're not physically at the meeting space. And you can refer to it, it can be updated in real time. And that is a norm now for Prince George's County Public Schools, and as he said, it's a great benefit for collaboration. And so it's really simply a Google document that you create in your Gmail account. You will have to have a Gmail account to create it. But basically it is just a Google document that you create, and we will be glad to share more about it in a forum that you make available, Matt.
Okay, sounds great.
Sharon, can I add one thing
yes,
to that, Sharon? So
please.
Just giving a little background, we're a Google Apps for Education district. So every single employee in our district has a Gmail account associated with the entire suite of, you know, Google Apps for Education, whether that's YouTube, Google Drive, everything. Another little, you know, dropping a name here, Sergey Brin, the founder of Google, is a graduate of Prince George's County Public Schools K through 12. So you're talking about a district who the founder of Google is from Eleanor Roosevelt High School Science and Tech program. So we definitely love using a lot of Google products. Everyone can definitely use the Drive, and our awesome technology training team has done lots of training, I mean hundreds of sessions, thousands of sessions over the last several years with getting everyone on the same page with their professional skills with use of Google documents, whether it's, you know, YouTube for instruction, or, you know, Google rolling agendas and Google Docs, or just a Google Calendar to keep everything organized. I know this event today was on my Google Calendar, and I got an alert on my phone previously before we started. So it's definitely something that we've always, I think, has made our work a lot more streamlined and manageable.
Sounds great, y'all. Thanks for that clarification and elaboration there. Two more questions we're going to try to squeeze in here before the bottom of the hour. Alice is asking the question, per standard number 9, what is your model for collaborative learning time? Again, per the conversation there about standard number 9 panelists, what is your model for collaborative learning time? Quick question, quick answer there, and then we've got one more.
I think I can answer that fairly quickly. In the high school level, our standard is that each core area, English, math, social studies, science, have either an A day or a B day where they can collaboratively plan at least once a week. So they are able to meet with all of the teachers in their subject area and collaborate, plan, look at data, and analyze data at least one time per week for a period of about 50 minutes.
So from
if that answers that.
Someone else was going to add something there?
Yes, William, I was going to support that. So from a practical standpoint, an administrator, an assistant principal, a principal, or department chair cannot be present at all the meetings that would happen, the collaborative meetings that would happen in the course of a day. The beautiful thing about a rolling agenda is it allows an administrator to dial in electronically, because that rolling agenda, someone is capturing notes in real time in terms of what's being discussed in that meeting, so that administrators can virtually be in multiple meetings simultaneously. And so that's why in the district we support the rolling agenda.
Okay, very interesting. Several people, and I'm sorry, there's a few more questions still rolling in here that we're going to have to answer online just to stay with our timing here. So we appreciate the questions, and we will talk offline about how to get you answers to those. The two general questions that several people have written in that I want to make sure the panelists have time to answer here is about the slides. Panelists, is there a way that we can make these slides available? Do you want that to go through NASSP, or have people contact one of you, just a primary contact to get these slides if they would like them?
Excuse me, Matt, this is Carolyn, and the PowerPoint will be available to everyone on the NASSP website.
Okay, so, and that's also with the second question there. Some people have asked about when the webinar will be available on the website. So that's usually within 24 hours. Anybody that wants to access this actual presentation again should be within about 24 hours. And Carolyn, with NASSP, the actual PowerPoint slides will be at that same place with a presentation, correct?
Correct.
Okay, excellent. The last thing, everybody, I want to make sure that you're aware of and extend an invitation to you. Hopefully you're already aware, but if not, this next summer, not summer of 16, summer of 17, July 9th through 11th, up in the great city of Philadelphia, up for most of us, down for some of you, but in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, partnering with the National Association of Elementary School Principals, will host a joint conference there in Philadelphia. So if you don't already have that on your Google Calendar that we were just talking about, or whatever other calendar you use, go ahead and get those dates down there, and both the organizations working closely together on that. Should be an excellent conference with the combined resources and expertise of those two associations working together on that. Personally, I'm looking forward to that. As all our conferences are always great, but that combination I'm really looking forward to. So mark your calendar, tell your friends, be watching the NASP website and Twitter handles and all those kind of things. So those of you that have sent an email in, sent a question in that we did not get to, if you would just reach out to the most efficient way is just to reach out to one or more of the panelists there through their school website, school email, and they will get you an answer there. I apologize we didn't have time to get to all of those, but to all the participants out there, really appreciate you again taking some time this afternoon. I personally learned quite a few things in here. I trust it was beneficial to all of you. And we hope you all have a great day. Thanks very much to our presenters today.
Thank you.
Thank you.